to chair this side event. So welcome to this side event entitled Global Energy Transition and Local Realities, Vulnerabilities, Development, Mitigation, Trade-off. This side event is organized by the Center for Applied Mathematics for Tech in France and the International Research Center on Environment and Development, CIRED. We are both partners in the chair modeling long-term for sustainable development. So this side event will focus on the main challenges facing the implementation of an efficient and fair transition, particularly in South countries, especially when we consider the diversity of context, the main barriers and obstacles, but also enabling conditions for overcoming these obstacles. To do that, we are happy to gather 6 distinguished experts, mostly academics, and the idea of this session is also to confront research with other perspectives, and we have also a representative from NGO to enlarge the perspectives. I hope that discussion with the audience will also enable this type of discussion. This side event, this session will be divided in 2 parts. First part, I will give you the floor to 6 speakers, and each speaker will have 10 minutes of presentation, and then we have time for question and answers with the audience. So now I invite our first speaker, Charlène Barnet, PhD candidate at Center for Applied Mathematics. Our research focuses on modeling of low carbon transition in MENA countries in particular. So Charlène, it's up to you for the presentation.
Good afternoon, good evening now, everybody. So let's delve into the subjects. So depending on where you come from, the energy transition does not hold the same promises nor face the same obstacles to its implementation. With this in mind, I'm going to present to you the specific challenges facing a region which is highly dependent on hydrocarbons and highly vulnerable to global warming, the Middle East and North Africa region. To begin with, I will briefly explain in what ways the region depends on fossil fuel. In the next part, I will display some of the negative impact of such a dependence and then present several of the other challenges the region is facing. On a more optimistic note, we will then see how the energy transition could be an opportunity to tackle some of these challenges, and I will conclude with the key role of international cooperation and funding. As I just said, the countries of the Middle East and North Africa strongly rely on oil and gas for their economic and energy needs. This region encompasses 7 out of 13 members of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, but also other significant oil and gas producers that are not part of the OPEC, like Qatar or Egypt. It also gathers some net importing countries which do not have any fossil fuel resources or very limited ones. Currently, it accounts for nearly half of global oil exports and 20% of oil trade, while also holding the majority of the world oil and gas resources. The abundance of oil and gas resources in the region has resulted in a high share of fossil fuel in the electricity production. 90% of the electricity was generated from fossil fuels in 2021, and it even goes to almost 100% in some countries. The majority of this electricity is coming from gas-fired power plants. 2 countries have nuclear power plants, Iran and the United Arab Emirates. Nations with limited or no hydrocarbon resources, such as Morocco or Egypt, tend to perform a little bit better in terms of installed renewable capacity. This situation brings about adverse consequences for these nations. The first consequence is the contribution to global emissions. As you can see in the right part of this figure, GCC countries show record high CO2 emission per capita, CO2 emission per capita. Algeria and Egypt are the largest contributors to CO2 emission in Africa, just after South Africa. despite their per capita CO2 emission being lower than the global and regional averages. It is noteworthy to highlight the significant disparities in per capita CO2 emissions among these countries. This is explained by the wide differences in electricity consumption and, consequently, in living standards across the region. For example, Qatar's per capita electricity generation is 10 times that of Algeria. While many countries have benefited from oil and gas windfalls, they have in the same time developed a significant economic dependence on the hydrocarbons trade. As for net hydrocarbon exporting countries, oil and gas sales contribute the main portion of their export earnings and a large share of their GDP and tax revenues. This excessive dependence results in poor economic diversification, uncompetitive energy sectors, high levels of fossil fuel subsidies, and lack of investment. It also means high vulnerability to fluctuation in international market prices. For example, last decade sharp decline in oil prices had severe repercussions on the budget of these states. Finally, the substantial domestic consumption of oil and gas is viewed as an opportunity cost for exporting country and as a burden for the trade balance of importing countries. In addition to the challenges posed by the excessive dependence on oil and gas, the MENA region grapples with various socio-economic, political, and environmental challenges that further impact its energy future. First, while the MENA region has been a key player in global hydrocarbon production and trade for decades, it is also among the most negatively affected by global warming. It faces high level of water stress and rising temperature and all the consequences that goes with it, like desertification, droughts, and coastal erosion. Climate projections indicate a worsening of pretty much all of these phenomena in the coming decades. The situation hence threatens food security, but also public health. So quite clearly, these countries have a compelling incentive to decarbonize their energy system. This situation, on top of its vulnerability to climate change, the MENA region also has to deal with a young and rapidly growing population that suffer high level of unemployment, especially among the youth. Furthermore, the region is plagued by recurring conflicts that profoundly impact its economic, political, and social stability. Lastly, some MENA countries display insufficient and inadequate power system. As a consequence, population suffer power outages and difficulties accessing electricity. All these additional factors are placing escalating constraints on power system in the region. In this context, the energy transition holds the potential to address some of the challenges faced by the MENA region. First, and this is the main target, the energy transition should bring positive environmental impact through human activities decarbonization. Here we can take the example of hydrogen, as it is seen as a promising solution to decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors like steel, iron, or refining activities, which are a subject of interest for MENA countries. Secondly, it has the potential to boost the economy by improving the trade balance and reducing the energy bill for importing countries. Additionally, it can create new value-added industries and export products. A good illustration of this are the expectations around hydrogen. Thirdly, and this is very important in this case, the energy transition could generate significant job opportunities, not only in the energy sectors, but also in the broader economy. Finally, transitioning to clean energy could contribute significantly to energy equity, security, and sustainability. But some features of the mineral market may prevent the consistent implementation of the energy transition. For example, high subsidies on fossil fuel create market distortions. Moreover, we must keep in mind that given the current state of renewable energy technologies penetration, the scale of the task to be completed is huge and will demand massive funding. And it turns out that financing is a tricky point for the region. Indeed, except for the GCC who builds powerful sovereign funds, other MENA countries have difficulties accessing investment and securing funding because the investment environment is perceived as risky and not very business friendly. This situation is preventing projects from being realized and costs from going down. De-risking the investment environment is then crucial to allow for the funding of the energy transition. To do so, cooperation with international institutions and companies are key. Besides financial support, setting clear roadmaps and intention send positive signals to markets and funds providers. This support can be made through a memorandum of understanding like this one signed between the European Union and Egypt for a strategic partnership around renewables. Finally, contractual tools like power purchase agreements are another set of solutions that can be mobilized to secure investment environments and make the energy transition a reality in the MENA. And that's it for me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Charlène, for this broad overview of the challenge for energy transition in this region, and I like the point you raised about the question of finance and the way it can be managed by international cooperation in this region. So now it's time to have our second speaker. So Joana Portugal online. Joana, are you hearing us?
Yes, I can hear perfectly. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Perfect. Thank you. So Joana Portugal is assistant professor at the energy planning program of the COPE University Federal of Rio de Janeiro. Our research focuses on energy system innovation toward mitigation with an evaluation of global and local environmental impacts. And she was also a part of the IPCC Working Group 3 in ARX6. So, Joana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chris, for the kind introduction and organizers for inviting me to be part of this relevant event. And as we navigate in the landscape of global energy transition with complex in terms of local realities, vulnerabilities, mitigation, conflicting developing priorities, I'm eager to share with you a modeling exercise and a case study we conduct about the legal Amazon in Brazil and potential sustainable pathways for future. You may be aware of the Amazon, but when we talk about Amazon, we are talking about much more than the rainforest. It actually includes 3 different biomes with an amazing biodiversity heritage. So we are discussing about not only the rainforest, but also the Brazilian savanna, so-called Cerrado, and the wetlands, the Pantanal biome. It includes more than 5 million square kilometers, which is about 60% of the entire Brazilian territory, and it's roughly bigger than the European Union itself. It includes about 28 million inhabitants, which is roughly the population of Nepal or half of the population in South Africa. And it includes more than 600,000 indigenous people from more than 170 different ethnic groups. Despite that, we are discussing that the well-being for these people, it is necessary and essential to improve the infrastructure. However, to meeting this challenge, specifically considering the lack of basic access to clean water, sanitation, energy, and the high levels of inequality and the remote access to the region, it struggles and is a big challenge. Unfortunately, in the past, the region has been focus on prioritizing short-term development with local groups' best interest rather than focus on the local people needs. It's not new for anyone in the room that in the last 36 years, we lost more than 23% of the total Amazon biome. We have more than 83% of that deforestation being driven by export products. So it's not even to support and to develop the local people. In 2019, we reached a high peak of emissions from deforestation that reached over 1 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent emission. On the top of that, we have high levels of inequality, low index of human development, and we still have more than 1 million people with no access to electricity. Considering this, it's essential to align local realities with global mitigation goals. And what we did in this small project was actually to try to answer this question, how we can actually align local priorities, including the local context of the region, with the global mitigation goals aligned with Paris Agreement. And to do that, we developed 3 different potential future pathways, playing around with 2 different factors. One, restricting greenhouse gas emissions or not, and the second factor related to deforestation rate. So in terms of a reference pathway, we have no restrictions in terms of deforestation nor impose any kind of low carbon energy transition. So basically, we are suggesting the future will actually follow an unsustainable pathway. And if we do so, we would actually reach an accumulated level of greenhouse gas emissions of more than 43 gigatons CO2 by 2050, which is the unsustainable pathway and carbon-intensive economic pathway. On the other hand, we consider to restrict greenhouse gas emissions to fulfill Paris Agreement, but without constraining deforestation levels. And in that sense, this scenario or this pathway become unfeasible, meaning our integrated assessment model could not provide solutions for that, considering that we do not control deforestation, suggesting that if we take seriously the Brazilian mitigation pathways and that align with Paris Agreement, we must control deforestation in the region. On the other hand, the green here, you can see the forest support. We had no restrictions in terms of imposing low carbon energy innovations, and we assume a 0 deforestation rate as suggested in the Brazilian Forest Code. In that sense, we found that this would be not sufficient if we combine only deforestation control and not impose a low-carbon infrastructure in the region. So what we see here in blue is actually the match of these 2 different factors. On the one hand, supporting and controlling deforestation in the region. On the other hand, imposing low-carbon innovation and implementation of low-carbon infrastructure. So in order to ensure equitable access to infrastructure, we focus on 4 different pillars. The region requires sustainable, high-quality infrastructure that can simultaneously attend to local needs and to fulfill the global mitigation targets defined by the country. So we focus specifically on improving the infrastructure and tailor it to the local resources. And we consider different aspects of local renewable energy sources, thinking of biomass, waste, microgrids, increasing the storage and providing second life batteries usage in the region. On the other hand, we also focus on the transportation in the region, which is highly remote and challenging. So for that, we evaluate different aspects of increasing connection of people and regions through water and air transportation, and also increasing the e-connectivity aiming to avoid or reduce the activity of kilometer miles. So overall, in this pathway that was labeled New Economy in the Amazon, we consider two different aspects. Environmental protection would be able to increase the standing forest and improve native vegetation of more than 80 million hectares, and that would bring multiple benefits in terms of ecosystems services, increasing the carbon stock that is essential for climate negotiations and to bring international cooperation needs to the region, would also be able to reduce water losses and increase the soil carbon content in the area. On the top of that, this new economy Amazon would be able to increase the GDP in the region and provide more than 800,000 new jobs focused on bioeconomy and restoration sectors. However, in order to reach this utopian pathway, we identified 6 different barriers that need to be overcome. In terms of institutional constraints, we observe a fragmentation of policy, a lack of cohesion and integrated policies at different levels of the government, and clear regulation regarding land use, resource use, and sustainable practice. On the top of that, we observe irrational agents with very complex land tenure and disputes of land ownership in different systems that go beyond legal terms.
You have 2 minutes left,
we face
Joanna.
in the region, thank you. We face in the region political barriers that constrain the capacity to access to markets and funding and credit. In terms of technologies, we have limited access in advanced and sustainable technologies, especially considering the remoteness of the region, and we lack of capacity for local people and environmental awareness. So in terms of research agenda, and this is my last slide, we identified 5 different areas where we need to do better, both in international scientific community and also in the Brazilian research centers. We need to get better data and modeling tools that specifically assess and tailor the context of the region. We need concrete and clear plans to conceptualize what would be called a bioeconomy, ensuring the preservation of standing forests and the inclusion of indigenous knowledge. Third point is related to the fiscal policy. We currently see heavily supported fossil fuel subsidies in the region, and its phase out would definitely have regressive impacts in the population. And considering green incentives and moving from fossil fuel subsidies to more low carbon sustainable practices is still unknown and hasn't been studied properly. And lastly, in terms of credits to local people, we observe an adequate allocation of incentives to agricultural practice that do not take us to a long-term low carbon pathway. So one suggestion would be to investigate the potential impacts of transforming the conventional rural and farming credits into dedicated low carbon emission agricultural plans, such as the one already in motion in Brazil by ABC and ABC+. So thank you very much, and I'm here willing to participate in the debate and answer to your questions. Back to you in the room.
Okay, thank you, Joanna, for this very interesting presentation on the tension between the optimal pathway and potential barriers and obstacles and research perspective for Brazil. Now I give the floor to Amit Garg, professor at MIGA for about India. Amit Garg is professor in the public system group at the Institute of Management of Ahmedabad. He has an extensive expertise in energy, climate change, sustainable development, with a focus on modeling, and also was involved in the last IPCC report working with FREE. So Amit, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I've been a modeler for last 25 years and guided many students on this. Finally, what we realized, that until you link it with policymakers, until you link it with businesses, because actions have to happen at both these ends. No, researchers, modelers have to understand these two things. That is first point. I'll break my short talk into three domains. First is, how much energy does a country like India need? How much energy? Because then only energy transitions. Then, how do we want to transit from the energy basket to this clean energy basket? That's the second question. The third is finance and technology needs. What are required for these transitions? So first, I'll handle these three questions. The first is how much energy we need. We link it with Human Development Index. Without development, energy cannot stand in isolation. So presently, India is, you all must be knowing Human Development Index, which is from 0 to 1. India is at 0.645, which is a medium HDI country. From there, we have to move to high HDI, which is 0.7 plus, then very high HDI, which is 0.8 plus, and then as good as the Scandinavian countries, which is 0.9 plus. So it is an aspiration, and India aspires to become a developed country by 2047, which is 100 years of our independence from the British rule. So it's a public aspiration, I can say. Some will go before, some will come later. So presently, India is using 31 gigajoule per capita per year, 21 gigajoule, which is like very, very low energy consumption anywhere in an emerging economy. And 0.605, 21. To move to high HDI, that is 0.7, we need about 29 gigajoules. So about 50%, 40% enhancement is required to reach there, which we plan to do in next 5 years or 7 years. We plan to do that. The third stage is very high, that is 0.8. We require about 37 gigajoule per capita per year, which will be about almost 80% more than what we have now. And the last is, if we want to become 0.9 and plus, this requires 57 gigajoule per capita per year, which is almost 3 times than what we are having now. So that is the first thing. And if we convert that into our 1.4 billion, 1.45 billion, which will be the average population after 20 years maybe, this will come out to be 18,000 terawatt hour per year for the country as a whole, to 22,000 terawatt hour per capita, total for a country. Now this is a huge energy requirement, huge. And we are endowed with coal. We cannot blame anyone, but we have got coal. Somebody got gas, somebody got new, we got coal. So we have to work on coal. That is number one, point number one. And then we import, even then we have coal, we import 20% of our coal annually, which is about 200 million ton annually we import from Indonesia, from South Africa, from all these countries. And then 85% of our crude oil we import, because India is consuming about 5 million barrels per day. 5 million. We are a growing economy, and then many cars are there, many other transport is there. So that is the second thing to be borne in mind. The next is that the transition, these transition to happen, we have to move from fossil energy basket to renewable energy basket and less carbon intensive. You see, coal is not bad. The negative externality of coal are bad. So if we can handle those externalities, good. So we are going for renewable energy. We have very strong renewable energy target. We call it non-fossil energy target. We don't call it renewable because renewable is intermittent and we need a lot of storage, energy storage, which is very expensive presently. So we need energy transit to non-fossil energy, and our target is to have 50% of our energy capacity, not the energy, but generation capacity by 2030 coming from non-fossil, 50%. It's a very big target that way. Then I think we keep this, that of course India has heavy energy taxation. People don't know this, but I must take this opportunity to tell. India puts about 20% tax on every coal we consume, 20% taxation. We put about 60% taxation on every oil we consume. We don't understand. We don't call it carbon tax because tax has different connotation in the public. But we have 20% taxation on coal and 60% taxation of oil. So if somebody says, please remove subsidy, I just look, what are you talking about? Subsidy is not there. We provide subsidy to power, to poor people. That's all right. We provide, but not for power plants to use coal. They have to pay for this. And we have many energy transition challenges. We have achieve trade targets which have been given to about 1,200 industrial units, including about 13 sectors, power, steel, cement, fertilizer, 13 sectors, have this individual firm plant level target, which are every 3 years they have to comply, specific energy consumption, energy efficiency. We call it PAT cycle. Then we have more RE target, non-fossil energy target, very strong target. But for renewable, the integration remains a big challenge. Still, it's a large country, and if you say that I will provide a priority to solar power, good. But then coal power has to ramp down when solar comes in, and ramps up when solar goes out in the evening. So this is a very tough thing to do for business. Guys who are owning these plants, they just have to invest 15-20% extra capital on that, and then there is a challenge. Nuclear power, nuclear energy we should be going for nuclear. And nuclear is something which we learned from France, and this is something. So we have 20% ethanol blending target. We have 10% biomass pellets blending target with coal. All these, and about more than 50% has already been met. These are the target till 2025, 2030. Finance, I'll just make a last point. We had this G20 presidentship in India, and we had international financial institutions, including multilateral development banks. They should reform, and they are taking actions to reform. Their total call-in capital, which is a technical term, is about $120 billion. We have counted about 9 MDBs, and to this, they can raise about 8 to 9 times capital. If it is 120 billion, they can raise about $1 trillion for giving projects. Our suggestion is, if you can increase this 120 to 200, This is coming from OECD countries. Don't give 100 billion, give 80 billion to these institutions which are controlled by you. You means developed countries. Please give them 80 billion and then they can raise about $700 billion every year. They can raise. So this type of flexibility is very simple. You just have to increase their finance balance sheets. That's all. So these things, I'm very surprised why it is not happening. This was at G20, we made a policy paper, and this is the main thing, securitization of renewable asset. World Bank has taken a call 2 days back, and they are going to do with it. So many, many things are possible to solve. North and South can definitely cooperate and collaborate. It's not that you go your way, I go my way. If the world has to survive, we have to cooperate, we have to work together. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you for articulating the different type of challenges for India internally, technically, but also the necessity also to have this international collaboration on finance. India is not alone, and the challenge is huge given what you said about the future in terms of consumption of energy. Thank you again. Now it's time for presentation of Edi Asomou. So, okay. So Edi is a senior researcher at Center for Applied Mathematics, Paris. He has a huge experience, extensive experience in energy modeling, times model, in France, Europe, and also in Africa. So, yeah, Edi, please take the floor for giving us your perspective, methodological maybe perspective about these issues.
So thank you for the kind introduction. So, good evening, everyone, and I'm very happy to be here and to share those thoughts with you. Again, I've been working on models for a long time, and I think I start my presentation with a quite provocative title, which would be Modeling for an Implementation Phase. Here, what I would like to do is to focus mainly on 3 main messages, and I will make those messages clear from the start so that we can discuss them in those 10 minutes. The first one is that we've been working a lot on models, but what are the roles now? The second point is that after this overview of the role of models, my belief, and which is shared by a lot of modelers, is also that we need to accept this new challenge and think differently what we do about the models. Build different models, build models with people, not build model to teach things, but build a model to assist decisions. And this new phase, these new challenges, it questions our models because we're not necessarily ready for that. So for this, I'll give 3 examples, just quickly, different countries, different perspectives. And then this will lead me to the difficult question is, who does it? And the difficult question, which is the capacity building and what I would say real transfer challenge, which is not necessarily there yet. So I'll go through those 3 points, and those are the main takeout of what I would like to share during those 10 minutes. And so I will start with the first one, just with this graph that you don't have to look, but just to say that we've been doing a lot of modeling. And those graphs come from the IPCC reports. And what we can see is that in this report, we have 2,000 models, which was narrowed down to 1,000 with different trajectories. And models have been at the foundation to lay the scientific foundation. And what we've been doing is produce outputs, which will be graphs like this, which are very nice for experts. But if you look at the graph below, it's a huge margin of uncertainty for solar, for CCS, for wind, for biomass. Most of the scenarios will say by 2030, we don't want any more traditional biomass in the world, which means no more traditional biomass in Africa. And when you go down to the implementation, those questions are very difficult. We're talking a lot about fossils, but we also have those, how do we do that? What are the political and societal impacts? Who can say that by 2040, the world will achieve this clean cooking strategy? The time frame is short, even if the model says that that's the direction we should go towards. So here I would like to quote, we had early this year, we had a meeting with, in the ECOWAS region, and one participant made a very nice quote, and I would like to say it. He said, we don't want any more PowerPoints, we want power plants. And it was framing nicely this implementation phase. And so the question is, what is the role of models in this new phase? And one way to do that is to say that we need to do our homework and question the way we model. And so I would like to give 3 examples. The first one will be on Ivory Coast, the second one will be on Algeria, and the third one will be on a new paradigm, which will be new links, new ways to exchange energy between continents. So here I share work we did. It was financed by the AFD, the French Development Agency, and we studied power system expansion in Ivory Coast for 2050 horizon, and as usual, one of the, and it was also in Professor Garg's presentation, it's the huge increase, the huge demand. In 40 years, you need to multiply by 4 the demand of electricity. That's not the case in Europe, that's not the case in the US, but it's a different challenge. And so, which means it's not so much as going down with fossils, it's how fast you can increase your system. And so we did different scenarios. The first one, we had coal was part of the channel. The second one, we have a limitation policy. And the third one, we have a more wider development of reducing cost of wind, reducing cost of solar, which means that in the first one, and as you can see, the yellow part grows faster. But if I leave the modeling aspect, you can see also that you have a gray line there. It represents the battery and the storage. And this much storage, it means by 2050, we need as much storage as all electricity produced today. So, because the system will be so big, the size of storage needs to scale up at the size of the current power system. And today, the technology and the focus is not there yet. So even if you won't be 100% in 2050, the gap is huge here. So just few points, and this is really important. If I leave the modeling hat and I say, okay, this is what we can do, well, the context is changing very fast. When we finished this study, after the coal plants were cancelled, it was after the COP in Glasgow, I think, and finally, yes, the government decided not to go through with the coal plants. It's not out of the plan, but for the time being, this one would not be constructed. There was also new gas discovery. Like in Senegal, we also had a lot of gas in Ivory Coast now. And there were a lot of scenarios about regional trade and supply security and importing massive amount of electricity from the north and from the Sahel region. And all those questions are making a landscape that changes faster than we adapt our models today. Second question is the construction rate and the capacity ramp up. If you have to build a system of several gigawatts in a very short time, that's an industrial problem. It's not really a modeling problem, and that's where we get to the implementation and power plants first. And as I mentioned, the development of this storage strategy, it's objectively huge. So that's what I wanted to share for the case of Ivory Coast. I will now go quickly to a second case with a lot of graphs, but I'll just walk you through them. Basically, here the question is, and it's been asked, what would a gas exporter do in face of the energy transition. And here what you can see in green is the amount of gas that is exported in Algeria. And in blue, it's what's used in the power plants and then in industry and in residential. So today, we're talking about decarbonizing the gas sector. If you go from left to right, the scenario shows that if you're looking at myopic, if you say my strategy goes up to 2030, that's the first block, there's no problem. 2035, no problem. 2040, it can be okay also. If you go to the three graphs below, yes, then you see that by 2050, you may have okay, by 2050, you may not have enough gas for your system, and so no more export. Which means that when we're talking about modeling in Algeria, the problem will be shale gas as an option, and it will be also, even if you decarbonize your power sector, which you can see in the last slide on the left, it doesn't change the big picture because you need more gas for the industry and more gas for the other sectors. So that's a challenge here for Algeria. So state budget, shale gas dilemma, the possible role of renewable. Here you would do renewable to be able to have more gas in the future for your industry. So you can decarbonize the power system, but it's because you will need gas for industry. And what does it mean for global decarbonization? And then the last one, I'll go very quickly through it. We're talking a lot about, we did a model linking the 29 countries in Europe with 6 countries in North Africa, and just one takeout away. This is what it looks like in 2050. You have hydrogen coming from North Africa and helping to supply hydrogen to Europe, and there's been a lot of talk about it. But if we take the key takeaway of this analysis, is that the systems have different scales. The European system is like 5 times the North African one. And so this hydrogen economy would be 8% of electricity production for hydrogen in Europe, but it would be 30% of electricity production. It could be up to 30% for hydrogen in North Africa. So the question behind is that who is more at risk with this strategy not happening, and who will be willing to do the investment and bear the risk? So the geographic allocation of the investment is a challenge. So that's the third case. And for that, what we're doing is trying to multiply trainings, and because we can't do it alone. And so we've had some training activities, and we're not doing it well. From science to decision, we need, that's our goal now. This is the point where I will give us, let's say, 4 out of 10, because we need to have cooperation, coalitions, and try to do better, because we can't do it alone. So thank you, and that was few takeout from a modeling perspective.
Thank you, Eddie, for stressing this question of the policy relevance of models, given the evolution of context, and also this the challenge of capacity building. I think this is a point we will come back. So now I give the floor to Franck Lecocq. Franck is director of CIRED. He's a climate economist. He has expertise research on the link between climate change and development pathway, and he was coordinating leader of IPCC Group 3, Chapter 3. Franck, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christophe, and thank you all for being here. What I'd like to come in, the question that this session is trying to ask is how we can think and support the implementation of the energy transition. And I guess what I would like to explore here is that to help the implementation of transition, we need to have more to limit the uncertainty, to give more insights on the macroeconomic impacts that such transition create. We are talking about, as we have heard before, about major transformations, not marginal ones, which cannot but have implications for GDP, for employment, for inequalities, And so all these elements that one need to care a bit about before launching into large-scale programs. And I would argue that uncertainty on those impacts is actually one barrier to the implementation of these policies. Of course, it's not. I mean, any kind of large-scale policy has macroeconomic impacts. It's not just the energy transition. So one would say, okay, there are models, there are things, tools out there that can indeed inform these questions. Yes, but in some countries, the macroeconomic modeling is just lacking capacity, or even when it exists, it's often insufficient and not adapted to tackle challenge related to energy transition, in particular because the macro models are typically disconnected from the techno-economic models, such as the ones that were presented before. So we do not embark on the right technological information. So one has to develop new tools, or at least to adapt the existing ones, and the response that I would like to share elements of one response, one approach to building new tools, which we have co-developed with many teams around the world, including Professor Garg's team in India, which is basically a process to co-develop country-specific models with national teams, where we try to couple basically energy approaches, one energy model as presented before, and one macroeconomic framework with, and that's a big challenge, harmonizing just the data is an issue. We also try to in that macro framework to represent the flows in details, the flows between agents, so the fiscal policies and the different flows, so as to better capture the distributive impacts of these policies at the end of the day for different households. What do they get? What do they get? What do they pay? And what's their net income? So that's a process, and that's also a network. As you see, there are 14 countries and teams that work together to co-construct these models, to exchange ideas, tools, just code, data, know-how, experience, etc. Just to give you some quick insights of what kind of type of results that this kind of approaches can bring. We've been working, oil exporting countries have been mentioned before, and we've been working a lot on Saudi Arabia, trying to assess the macroeconomic implications of that economic diversification plan, trying to move a bit away from just oil-only export economy. And what we find is that this both reduces or limits the growth of their emissions and also acts as an hedging strategy against variations and shocks in the oil market. However, to get there, we had to spend a lot of time in development, because the macroeconomic of Saudi Arabia is extremely specific. They have their currency, which is linked and actually to the US dollar. They have the sovereign fund that acts as a buffer, and which does not exist anywhere else in the world, and requires very, very specific development. Just another example to give you the type of questions that can then be addressed. In Nigeria, preliminary results suggest that allow us to estimate the amount of international aid in investment flows may be needed to make a net zero scenario actually better in terms of macroeconomic output, employment and GDP, compared with continuation of current policies. Finally, further very quick examples in the work in South Africa, this kind of macro modeling help us explore what could happen if some of the proceeds from the carbon tax that have been developed are used towards education in a country where lack of skilled labor is a major bottleneck to economic development. Let me conclude or give with some lessons learned more on from that process and experience, both on model building and on creating and collaborating within this network on that research policy interface. First, a big lesson from the literature in general and from our findings as well is that macroeconomic impacts of transition policies, they are not carved in stone. They really strongly depend on how you implement these policies, what kind of instruments, what policy packages they are in. So you need to have quite a lot of flexibility in your model to capture these different visions, especially since people around the room, when they discuss, may not agree on what kind of instrument should be put in place, even if they agree on the target itself. Second, one has to be very humble and recognize that economic theory provides, macroeconomic theory provides insights, but certainly not definitive answers on how GDP or employment or growth reacts to transition policies. There are several views. You have Keynesian, non-Keynesian, etc. So you have also to be able to have models that these different schools recognize, can agree on, or you have to be able to put these different people around the table. Third, last but not least, macroeconomics is just very complicated just to comprehend. You know, the micro costs, the price per gallon you pay at the pump, the extra cost, that's easy to at least to grasp. But the macro implications where, okay, you raise energy prices, that raises domestic prices, that changing the balance of trade, then that depresses GDP. But all the systems work are more difficult to comprehend. So you need to have tools that are transparent enough so that, because if you want to be useful in terms of policy making, it's not the final number that matters, but actually the way that the reasoning and the way that number came across. So that gives very strong terms of reference. You have to have models that are versatile enough or agile enough to test those policy packages. Ideally, you would not want one, but actually several models, some in public institutions, some in private ones, so as to have a diversity and to have the dialogue and as much transparency as possible. We are, and conclude on that, one little piece, and there are many other people trying to do that in that direction. What is still, the jury is still out there, the network is too young to capture that, is how much of what we develop is actually captured. We work with teams that typically have a micro modeling, they have a technical ability, and we're more bringing the macro one. In 10 years, we should have the macro models also should have been adopted and used by our colleagues. Will we be able to get there? That's a big issue. Which comes back, and that's the last point, to the issue of durability. As we know, just for our little French case, making models is a very long endeavor. You need time to develop your data. You need time to develop your models, to maintain them. And so you need some stability in funding, in people. And that is also a huge challenge we need to face. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Franck, for highlighting the main challenges for strengthening this interface between models and the policy decision-making process by insisting on capacity building, but also this question of flexibility of model, like also Eddie said, about how do you adapt models to the context. Okay, now time is to give the floor to our last speaker, Mohamadou Fadel Diop, who is research advisor, policies and innovation at OXFAM, and who has an extensive experience of low carbon transition, in particular in Africa. So, Mohamadou, the floor is yours.
Bonjour, merci Christian. Je vais d'abord m'excuser parce que je vais m'exprimer en français pour que les idées soient plus claires. Alors, je travaille pour OXFAM, une organisation qui travaille spécifiquement pour lutter contre l'injustice et les inégalités, qu'elles soient économiques, sociales, de genre et climatiques. Et peut-être que ça me donne une approche assez particulière sur cette question-là par rapport aux autres intervenants. Mais je reconnais avec tout le monde la complexité de ce sujet-là lorsqu'on parle de transition énergétique juste. Lorsqu'on écoute les différentes interventions qui sont passées avant moi, lorsqu'on pense aux barrières politiques, aux barrières institutionnelles, aux barrières économiques, aux barrières sociales. Et on peut aussi regarder les barrières à différentes échelles, qu'elles soient locales, qu'elles soient nationales, qu'elles soient internationales. Alors à OXFAM, ce qui nous intéresse beaucoup, c'est de partir des communautés à chaque fois, pour pouvoir tirer des évidences qui puissent ensuite informer les discussions au niveau national, au niveau local, etc., et même les négociations climatiques, notamment durant la COP28 à laquelle nous nous trouvons actuellement. Sur la question de la transition énergétique, il y a une question qui nous intéresse particulièrement avec les communautés, c'est de savoir, cette transition-là, est-elle un espace pour créer le changement ou est-elle un espace qui va permettre de faire du business as usual? Alors, je vais développer ces propos-là en partant du cas spécifique du Sénégal, qui est intéressant à plusieurs égards. Intéressant parce que le Sénégal vient de découvrir des ressources intéressantes en pétrole et en gaz. Intéressant parce qu'aussi, il a découvert ces ressources en pétrole et en gaz dans un contexte de changement climatique où on parle d'atténuation, où on parle de réduction des gaz à effet de serre afin de créer une société sobre en carbone. Intéressant aussi parce que le Sénégal a signé il y a 6 mois un JETP, un Just Energy Transition Partnership, lors du sommet financier, lors du pacte financier organisé à Paris. Et donc, comme le disait le président Macky Sall, ça pose une question fondamentale, parce que voici un pays qui vient de découvrir des ressources importantes, des ressources naturelles importantes qui pourraient propulser son développement, et pourtant, elle doit réfléchir à la possibilité, en tout cas, de ne pas utiliser ou utiliser ces ressources-là dans un contexte de changement climatique. Alors le Sénégal, le président le pose en ces termes. Nous ne pouvons pas choisir entre le développement ou la résilience climatique. Et le JETP qui a été signé va être une tentative de concilier ces deux objectifs-là. C'est-à-dire un objectif de s'aligner à l'accord de Paris pour pouvoir contribuer effectivement à créer une société de carbone, mais aussi contribuer à l'objectif double qui est de propulser le développement. Et c'est ça qui rend la situation intéressante, n'est-ce pas? Alors, je disais donc que, à partir du cas du Sénégal, ce qui est intéressant, c'est que de voir une approche par le bas, pour le dire ainsi. Et lorsqu'on a cette approche par le bas, on se demande comment ce nouveau partenariat qu'on dit qui est une fenêtre, en tout cas entrer dans un nouveau monde, un monde de transition, un monde vert, comment peut-on faire pour que ce partenariat-là ne reproduise pas les mêmes paradigmes qui ont échoué et les mêmes paradigmes qui n'ont pas permis jusqu'à présent au Sénégal et à plein d'autres pays africains de se développer? Comment ce partenariat peut être différent d'un système extractiviste dans lequel l'Afrique et le Sénégal en particulier produit des matières premières, mais des matières premières qui sont destinées à l'exportation, tandis que le tissu économique local est toujours peu diversifié, je disais donc, peu important, et qu'il n'y a pas assez d'emplois pour permettre aux populations de sortir de la pauvreté. Comment ce partenariat peut offrir autre chose que cela? Et donc, encore une fois, partant des communautés, on ne voit pas, de la perspective des communautés, on ne voit pas encore, à l'heure actuelle des négociations climatiques, à l'heure actuelle, mais on va le dire, c'est une phrase vraiment préliminaire, hein, on est au tout début de ce partenariat et il y a encore plein de choses à faire. Il y a un plan d'investissement technique qu'il faut élaborer en collaboration avec tous les aspects de la société civile, etc. Mais lorsqu'on voit l'histoire qu'on a dans les industries extractives, on est peu optimiste. Je viens donc du Sénégal où je travaille avec des partenaires comme cette dame, qui s'appelle Nadia, qui vit dans une petite localité qui s'appelle Bargny, une localité qui est peut-être l'une des localités fondatrices de Dakar, et une localité qui est fondée par des pêcheurs. Donc des pêcheurs qui ont longtemps fourni à tous les Dakarois le poisson qui puisse servir la sécurité alimentaire, qui puisse servir leur nourriture. Aujourd'hui, ces pêcheurs ne peuvent plus le faire. Ils ne peuvent plus le faire à cause de l'érosion côtière qui a détruit leur maison, ne peut plus le faire à cause de l'érosion côtière qui a détruit leurs moyens d'existence. Mais autant, comme Charlène le disait tout à l'heure, ils font face aux conséquences du changement climatique, ils font face aussi à des conséquences d'une politique énergétique et d'une politique industrielle qui les suffoque, qui a une emprise sur leurs propriétés foncières, qui limite leur accès à la terre, qui réduit leur possibilité d'avoir des emplois dignes et décents. Et on en voit tous la conséquence. La conséquence, c'est que des milliers de jeunes, des femmes, des enfants quittent ces localités-là dans des pirogues pour aller migrer dans la mer. Ce sont tous ces enjeux-là auxquels on doit réfléchir lorsqu'on parle d'une transition énergétique juste, parce que ce sont des enjeux qui sont liés. Il ne s'agit pas seulement d'une question d'allumer de l'électricité, il s'agit de bien plus que cela. Il s'agit de donner, dans un nouveau monde, qu'on dit vert, qu'on dit juste, de donner l'opportunité à des personnes de mener une vie digne, là où ils le veulent. Et donc, en partant de ces communautés, ce sont ces questions qu'on se pose, et on se demande aussi quelles réponses on pourrait apporter à ces questions-là. Et après beaucoup de réflexions, beaucoup d'échanges avec ces communautés, beaucoup de co-création, d'études, d'histoires, de narratifs que l'on crée avec eux, il apparaît que 3 aspects sont essentiels dans ce processus-là. Le premier, c'est la gouvernance. On ne peut pas parler de politique énergétique, de politique de transition, de politique macroéconomique ou politique, sans pour autant que les communautés pour lesquelles envers lesquelles ces politiques sont dirigées soient au cœur de ces politiques-là. Parce qu'en réalité, il ne s'agit pas seulement de réduire des émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Je pense que le professeur Hamid sera d'accord avec ça. Il s'agit de changer des comportements. Et ces comportements-là, ce sont les peuples, ce sont les communautés qui doivent être au centre de cela. C'est eux qui doivent pousser ce changement-là. Et ils ne peuvent pas le faire s'ils ne sont pas dans le siège avant qui va conduire cette transition-là. Et pour le faire, il faut que ces communautés, j'allais dire, parce que ce n'est pas seulement Bargny, c'est Sabadola, c'est Louga, c'est toutes ces zones d'exploitation minière qui donnent tellement de richesses à leur pays, mais où on voit les populations les plus pauvres de ces pays-là. Et je ne parle pas seulement du Sénégal, je parle, à partir de cet exemple-là, de beaucoup de pays africains. Donc, inclure ces communautés dans la gouvernance, premièrement. Deuxièmement, éduquer, sensibiliser. Ce n'est pas quelque chose que j'ai beaucoup entendu durant la dernière semaine des négociations climatiques, sans doute parce que les perspectives sont différentes. Mais quand on vient du Sénégal où une grande majorité de la population est analphabète, et on demande à cette population de parler du changement climatique, de la transition énergétique, des choses qui sont nouvelles, et qu'on leur demande d'être au centre de ces préoccupations, il faut alors beaucoup d'éducation, beaucoup de renforcement de capacité, beaucoup de transfert de technologies. Et là, ça m'amène à mon 3e point, parce que la transition énergétique, oui, elle va permettre de créer une croissance verte. À qui va profiter cette croissance? Pour que cette croissance puisse profiter aux communautés, pour que cette croissance puisse permettre le développement des populations et offrir des opportunités de vivre une vie digne à tout le monde, il faut que ces personnes puissent aussi bénéficier sur le plan économique de cette transition. Et c'est-à-dire renforcer, faire un transfert de technologies, créer une industrie locale, développer des chaînes de valeur au niveau africain. Et je suis content d'entendre le président William Ruto récemment, durant cette même COP28, qui appelle les chefs d'État africains à travailler autour de cette question-là en faisant de cette problématique une problématique panafricaine. Et peut-être c'est là la solution pour résoudre ou en tout cas faire face à cette transition énergétique. Je m'en arrête là pour l'instant. Merci.
Merci. Thank you, Mohamadou, for arranging the perspective of the transition, in particular starting from the perspective of the communities and how we insisting on some ingredients to favor this energy transition, in particular by insisting on education. So now we have some time for questions and answer from the panel. So if in the audience there are questions about question of clarification, a specific question about the issue to our panelists, feel free to ask, and please by starting to introduce you. And if there's questions, yeah, we have one question here.
Hello, thank you very much for organizing this panel. It's very interesting. I'm Cristina Peñasco, Senior Research Economist at the Banque de France and Associate Professor at the University of Cambridge. And I'm very interested on all the panelists were having very interesting statements, but in particular I would like to ask Professor Lecocq, because as my role as an academic, but now as a member of a decision-maker body, let's say, put it in that way, I've been working a lot with models. I'm not a modeler myself, but I've been trying to analyze these models and trying to understand how we can make them more accurate or to better predict, although I know modelers don't like really to say that they predict the future. And my question relates to path dependencies. How can we break or modify the way of thinking of the institutions that need to use these models? In central banks, we are used to use traditional macroeconomic models. Now we are very much aware of the risk that climates pose to macroeconomy, but still we are using traditional models that haven't been able either to model adequately, let's say, or completely policies that have been put in place out there, and also they haven't been able to model, for example, innovation in the most correct way, let's say. How can we break these path dependencies, and how can we educate or teach decision makers on which are the best models to use depending on the questions they want to answer? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Another questions in the audience? Not so far, not yet. So I propose that maybe Franck and maybe other panelists, if they want, answer the question.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. I wish I had an answer to it, because obviously there are, the mechanism that you describe, we've seen in several areas and instances. Maybe what I can share is in the French Treasury, for instance, also they are now adopting new frameworks that incorporate more of the elements that are more relevant for the transition. But this is quite recent, and certainly could have been. There's probably institutional inertia also on that front. I guess one issue is clearly to try is in the transparency itself. Is it really showing that what you do, not just results? Oh, we have results that are different from the others. Look, but also to explain. Okay, we have reasons that are different because we capture this and that the others are not, and those are important features. For instance, we need a better representation of technologies, or look, when we look at the macroeconomic data and we look at what's in public accounting on oil. In fact, it is not just the sale of oil, but oil services. So you have to distinguish the two to have something that is more relevant for emissions. Things like that. That's one area of element of research. The second is also that they at least not I'm not sure to how many countries it may apply, but there are also cases where before adoption there are exercises where you can bring several teams together and have them work. It doesn't mean the body adopts the model, but at least sees what is out there, and that's also a way to inform and have people about what the difference, the pros and cons of the different models they have out. But I understand it's a very partial answer to the question.
Okay, anyone want to complete from Amit or Joanna or Eddie?
Maybe India, we have not developed any model per se. We take models from our friends from Japan, from France, from USA. And then the challenge comes to me, as you are saying, I can see this is a challenge because developed countries have their own way of representing models and their economies. We have a lot of informal sector, we have a lot of dual economy, we have many other challenges. So how do we capture? So we do not change the models because that is a big effort, but we change how do we capture the represent the realities in this whole game. So that may depend on the country by country where you are using the same, let us say, Immaculate model he was talking about. It was a huge challenge. One of my PhD students came and sat here in Paris at CIRED for almost 4 months to set that, because that challenges are there. How do you balance the input-output table? And simply if we see, I think this elasticity management is something which could be easy to do. We just look at elasticity of each demand and then try to see whether it will change in future, so that to create a disconnect, maybe my very informal answer to what you are doing, this is what we do for when we say that power sector and coal, India has been growing on coal, whether it will grow in future also, same thing. So we try to disconnect and change the elasticity there, then maybe future will not be having that strong path dependency as the original model had. I don't know, but maybe. Thank you.
Eddie?
Yes, thank you for that question. That's somehow straight to the difficult question. I think one way we can see that is that for something as simple as a computer, if we say how do we choose a good computer, then we can spend weeks in trying to see, do I want a computer that has a large battery? Do I want the screen? Do I want what type of keyboard do I want? But we know the questions that we know the use case. And I guess part of the work that we haven't done that well is to define clear use cases so that somebody can come and say, okay, my problem looks like this problem, or to shorten the time between model thinking and decision makers. So that will be on the part of the modelers. I agree with what Frank said before. We have, let's say in 10, 15 years, the Immaculate network is big. Well, that means in 10, 15 years we'll be at almost COP 40 past. And so, which means the target should have been made before. We have to shorten the time between model thinking, implementation, and find a more agile way of doing those connections. If we get out of coal, how does it, what's the impact on the budget for India? Because if it's a big part of the taxes, if you get this out, what do you, and that's the same for the energy sector. So that's one part. The positive things is also, as teaching institutions, one way to change it may be, and that's a hopeful thing maybe, but I think by training and putting this modeling capacity and way of thinking early in the development career path for students, in 10 years, the newcomers in the banking industry would be the one making the change from inside. So I think we need to be confident in the fact that the change will come from the banks or the other groups, government sectors, and we need to be ready to accompany it by being willing to go for short sessions. For instance, if you say that you organize in your institution a session for just 4 days, and you want people to come and say, well, that's a challenge that we have to say, okay, let's get out of our offices and say, for 4 days, may it be online or what, we will take this amount of hours and we will go and have this discussion. So I think there's room, but we need to be agile as other industries have done, car industry, computer softwares. They've been able to solve these problems. And my last point would be that energy is small. The big problem is trade today. The world is trading everything. But we can think together, and if we think well, the others will say, oh, okay, yes, okay, we understand, we can take it, it's just a side. We don't need to be at the center. We need to find our place on the margin of the decision making. So that will be...
Maybe, Joanna, given the Brazilian context, do you have something to add about this specific question of past dependency in the use of models?
Thank you very much, Chris. Actually, I was thinking, as I used to say to my students, all models are wrong, but some are helpful, right? So there's no really answer what should be the best model. It really depends on the local context. And in Brazil, we have several groups working with integrated assessment model, macroeconomic models, and try to tailor the local specificities of the country within national boundaries and also subnational. As mentioned before by the Indian colleague, we had in India and other global south contexts, we have a very high informality in the economy. And when we discussed about macroeconomic models, mainly tailored and developed by the global north, they do not assess these specificities. And this is something that we struggle a lot in the exercise I showed here today in the Amazon. We have more than 50% of the population being in the shadow economy, and that cannot be seen by our default model. Therefore, we had to tailor it and to adapt to consider different aspects of the economy and also the socio-cultural specificities of more than 170 different groups of cultures in the region. Back to you.
Thank you, Joanna. Any more questions in the audience? No? Maybe in the last minutes we have for this session, I will ask a complementary question to all our panelists, and you can answer shortly on that. Given all the discussion we have, the presentation, what type of elements you will put on the research agenda, maybe in priority, to tackle the barriers, the obstacle to the energy transition? So I don't know who wants to start. Even Mohamadou, sorry. Given what you said about this question of bottom-up approach, maybe what will you put in priority for researchers, for instance?
Merci pour cette question. On a déjà dit ce qu'il fallait faire sur le plan de la gouvernance, sur le plan de l'éducation, sur le plan du transfert de technologie. Mais même si on sait ce qu'on doit faire, ça sera difficile de le faire s'il n'y a pas des moyens de le faire et s'il n'y a pas un cadre réglementaire, fiscal qui est approprié. Et je pense qu'en termes de recherche, ce qui pourrait être intéressant, c'est de voir justement comment on pourrait mobiliser du capital, comment on pourrait faciliter les investissements pour qu'on puisse avoir une transition énergétique. Juste quelques éléments, quelques données rapides. Il est 3 à 6 fois beaucoup plus facile d'investir dans le milieu du solaire aujourd'hui en Chine par rapport qu'en Afrique, alors qu'on sait que l'Afrique du Sud-Ouest en particulier possède le plus grand potentiel en termes d'énergie solaire. Aux Pays-Bas, il y a beaucoup plus, beaucoup plus de potentiel et de capacité solaire installée que dans toute l'Afrique. Et pourquoi? Parce que les barrières qu'il y a à l'investissement en Afrique sont extraordinaires et très différentes de ce qui peut se passer ailleurs. Et je pense qu'il y a déjà des solutions dans cela, parce qu'on appelle de plus en plus à ce qu'il y ait une réforme de l'architecture financière afin de faciliter les flux financiers en Afrique pour investir sur toutes les questions qui sont importantes pour les transitions énergétiques. Mais il y a encore de la recherche à faire pour savoir comment on peut vraiment mettre en œuvre cette réforme de l'architecture financière.
Thank you. Very important point. Franck?
Very briefly, I'll come back to the third point that Mr. Diop presented, which is energy transition creates opportunity, it creates costs, but it also creates opportunities. Yet a key issue is these opportunities, who will actually benefit from them. That is, I think, something that relates to the distribution, but not just the distribution of efforts, who gets the burden, but also the distribution of benefits. That, I think, is something that is a really important element where I see we can certainly make a lot of, we have tools, elements that can help in this direction, and where we can clearly make a lot of, much more progress than what we produce today. Thanks.
Eddie, if you have some.
Yes, thank you. I would also take from what the panelists said before. For me, the one question would be, what's the meaning of development? Instead of saying what's inside the model, it's what do we mean when we say development? Is it positive views or so?
Yeah, for me, two takeaway points for modelers. Number one is governments should commit more finances, long-term finances for modeling, as Frank was saying, may require 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, to really invest in researchers, in developing models, because it is a long-term commitment. That's the first thing I would like to have. Second thing, from researchers' point of view, modeler point of view, we should break the barriers between policymakers and businesses. If that is happening, because what we do, they don't understand. What they're asking, we don't do. Business is totally on a different track, maybe a 3 to 5 year track. So how do we take the same future? We cannot talk about the same future until we understand and break these barriers. So these are the two things I think should help long-term our modeling and research. Thank you.
Joanna?
Hello, thank you. I would highlight two priorities in the research agenda. Firstly, regarding the power dynamics, as was mentioned before by Frank, just transition implies some losers and winners. And many of the power dynamics, at least the ones we observe in the legal Amazon region, they are traced by irrational agents. And our global integrated assessment models or macroeconomic models, they see only the rational agents and they do not assess irrational behaviors. And that's specifically concerning land tenure aspects that we see in the Amazon. So a top priority is to better incorporate agent-based models that can see the granularity of agents with national and global ones. A second priority, and my last priority, I mean, I would have many, but it's regarding the material and mineral resources in the region. We are moving from a fossil fuel dependence to a material and mineral dependence, and we see many known reserves of essential minerals to low carbon transitions in the region that are threatening the natural ecosystem. So it's very important to understand how we can protect the ecosystems and the people living there and still going to the low carbon transition and fulfilling our mitigation goals. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Charlene?
Okay, so I'll do fast. So I think as young researcher, the main priority for us will be to be aware of this path dependency problem that has been mentioned, and try, when we are doing our research, to be as close as possible to local and real issues. So going to speak to communities, local people, businessmen, and policymakers would be a really good thing to focus on for future research, I think.
Okay, thank you. This gives us, I think, a rich agenda for further research, and I want to keep from your interventions, all interventions, that it's not only a question of content of them in terms of research, but also it is a question of being consistent with the context of the country. Also, it's a question of organization of research, organization of the interface between research and the decision-making process to be policy relevant. So I want to thank all the panelists and the audience here for these interventions and the rich discussion we have. Thank you again, and have a good COP and night also. Thank you very much.